Good afternoon, Legacy viewers, and welcome to this interview. Today, I'm interviewing Igor Ignatovich, one of the Russian interpreters in Angola during what we termed the Bush War. Welcome, Igor. I think if I start off just to ask you a little bit about yourself, I'm assuming you studied languages in order to become an interpreter.
Yes, good afternoon, Andrew. Good afternoon, Legacy Conversation. Thank you for inviting me to join your great project concerning the war veterans. Yes, my name is Igor Ignatovich. I'm colonel retired, and I started my military career as military interpreter back in 1980. So in 1980, I joined the Moscow Military Institute of Foreign Languages. That was the name here in Moscow. And I studied for 5 full years. It was a full profile military educational establishment, higher educational establishment. And after 5 years, I was commissioned lieutenant, and I started my work as military interpreter. During my study, I learned 2 languages. One English, one of them was English, and another one was quite exotic language, Greek. Andrew?
Yeah, the Greek must have been quite difficult. You know,
Yeah. Because there is a saying, it's all Greek to me.
yes, yeah.
But
Um,
anyway, this language is not so difficult as Afrikaans.
okay, but you've learned a little bit of Afrikaans, I believe.
Well, mostly curse words and some slang words, some military terms. Yeah.
Okay, and then when you graduated from the academy, you were then posted to Angola.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
In 1985, I graduated from the institute, and I was given an assignment overseas in Angola. I worked as interpreter with SWAPO.
Okay, and was that a choice, or were you just simply told you're going to Angola?
Well, actually, there was a choice. There was such a situation that you can choose either to work in the Soviet Union as military interpreter or go overseas to Angola or to any other third world country like Ethiopia, Mozambique, Libya, Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere.
Yeah, and then you spent the best part of 3.5 years in Angola. You started in Luanda, I believe.
Yes, in 1985, in August 1985, I arrived in Luanda, and from then, after probably 2 weeks of staying in Luanda and receiving some instructions, briefings, receiving our uniform, camouflage uniform, etc., we arrived in the city of Lubango. It's in the southern province of Angola called Huila.
Okay, and your living conditions, were you given apartments or did you sleep in the bush or?
In Lubango, we called it Soviet SWAPO mission. And the SWAPO Soviet mission was deployed in a 4-story building at the outskirts of Lubango. So the conditions, the living conditions were, quite comfortable, I should say.
Okay. And then you obviously interpreted for the SWAPO soldiers.
Yes,
That
correct.
was your role.
At the time, there were two training centers, SWAPO training centers, located in the vicinity of Lubanga. One of them was called the Haineco Training Center, and another one was called the Jumbo Training Center, not far from Lubanga, some 10 to 20 kilometers from the city itself. And each morning, we traveled to those training centers, and actually my task was to interpret or to translate lectures, to render assistance in military exercises conducted with SWAPO combatants.
Okay, and I mean, we were obviously seen as the enemy. I don't think we saw each other as the enemy. It wasn't a choice we had. Um, I think from our side, we were young 18, 19-year-olds, and we were conscripted, and we landed up wherever we landed up. We got trained and landed up fighting in Southwest Africa, as it was called then, or on the odd occasion going into southern Angola. But I mean, effectively, we were on opposite sides of the fence. But that's a long time ago, and I don't think any of us. I think if anything, if we can mend those bridges, it will be great. I believe you have met up with some of the South Africans that were there at that sort of time in later years.
Yes, there were several occasions when South African delegations, delegations of South African veterans, either from SADF or SWATF, South Africa Territorial Force, came to visit Moscow, and we met together here in Moscow at the office of our Union of Russian Veterans. For example, back in 2014, quite a representative delegation came from South Africa, headed by Major General Roland de Vries. There were some other outstanding, I should say, veterans like Corporal Mike Bale, like Colonel Hugo, Gary Hugo, and many other academicians like Leopold Scholz. They visited Moscow with their wives, and we spent quite a good time together, sharing our stories, sharing our opinions, and it was all awesome. And quite astoundingly, we came to a conclusion that at the time we were fighting each other okay, but we were not enemies, we were just opponents. And the situation, that brought us against each other was very unique, and it was not natural, it was unnatural to fight each other at the time. But still, it was like this.
Yeah. And then in terms of while you were working with SWAPO, obviously your opponents or at the time weren't really UNITA. It was basically more the South African army that would have maybe done a cross-border excursion. Um, but there were also, firstly, there were Russians. How many interpreters were there at any given time?
Yes, mostly we considered our enemy to be SADF, naturally, just because SADF, the task at that moment was to curb the SWAPO incursions through Namibia to Angola and back. At that time, there were approximately 10 to 12 interpreters working with the SWAPO mission. The number of interpreters varied. Some of them completed their mission and went back to Moscow. Others came on the rotation principle.
Okay, and then obviously possibly not all the time, but at some point in time, the Cuban numbers started building up as well. Were you involved with the Cubans?
Well, we considered Cubans who were who also were deployed in Lubango as our best friends, because we could rely them in any difficult situation and could ask for assistance just in any at any moment of daytime or nighttime. They would always come to help, to assist us, and to save our lives, literally save our lives. But we did not participate in indirect mixed or joint operations with the SWAPO and Cubans. No, at that time there was no such
Okay.
phenomena as mixed Cuban and SWAPO battalions. Only later, in 1988, we heard about such mixed Cuban and SWAPO battalion.
Okay, and the SWAPO as soldiers, did you have respect for them? Were they reasonably well trained?
Yes, it's a good question, a very interesting question, because I will read a lot of books, and I will like Aaron Durant,
Okay, yeah,
Zulu girlfriends, whatnot, many other books. Well, uh, this the question of effectiveness and the level of preparedness of SWAPO combatants for fight worried me at that time, because when we arrived and we started our lectures, our training, we learned that not all SWAPO combatants could speak even English. So it was very difficult for us to teach them something if only 1/3 of the of the say classroom was speaking English, and there was such a phenomenon as double or even triple interpretation. For example, I translated from Russian into English, and another instructor, SWAPO instructor, translated from English into Oshkwanyama or any other Avamba language.
okay, and I suppose a lot can get lost in that translation.
Yes,
So you
yes,
don't
that's why
necessarily
we
know
had
if the
to
correct.
yes, we have to adjust to correct to make it more and more efficient. And in the books written by South African authors, South African veterans, they mention it that during the say 1985, late 80s, let me say, yeah, late 80s, the efficiency of SWAPO combatants increased greatly.
Okay, then just in talking about the SWAPO soldiers, have you kept in contact with any of those that you potentially befriended while you were there?
Yes, of course, I worked. First of all, I worked with the president of SWAPO, Sam Nujoma, because Sam Nujoma frequently visited our Soviet mission in Lubango. Well, he discussed things, and I was interpreting for the future president of independent Namibia. Then I was interpreting for Martin Shali, for Charles Namolu, who later became ministers of defense or secretaries of defense in the independent Namibia. Here in Moscow, I met the previous ambassador, Namibian ambassador in Moscow, Dale Chekamati, with whom I also worked back in Angola, and the present day military attaché Levi Kapadachi is also a friend of mine with whom I met back in 1985 and 1988. It was a long time ago, but still we are friends.
Okay, oh, that's good to hear. And then in terms of Lubango, you then moved more to central. Lubango is a coastal city, isn't it?
Yes, in accordance with the agreement between MPLA, the government of Angola, and SWAPO, SWAPO combatants rendered assistance to government troops in fighting UNITA. That's why in 1987, I was assigned a mission to go to the city of Andula and the city, not city, just a small town, the town of Andula and the town of Nyaria in the central province of Bia. It's the heartland of Savimbi, of Jonas Savimbi, UNITA leader. And there I spent 3.5 months actually surrounded by UNITA troops, because the central provinces are obviously were obviously controlled by UNITA, and we conducted some operations against UNITA, but that was a rare case, rare occasion. Mostly we were located in Lubango and further south. We moved as far southwards as the towns of Onjiva, Shangongo, Menonge, and Matala, and Kahama as well.
Okay. I went back. I was a veteran of a battle known as Operation Skeptic, where we attacked the base of Smokeshell, 1980, and we lost 13 men that day, the 10th of June. And I think for South African forces that was considered a big number of casualties. You know, we weren't expecting to lose big numbers. But I went back last year to the battlefield. We were the first group that ever went back to the Smokeshell site. And on the way, we passed through Onjiva. Onjiva is a big town today. It used to be just a small little town in your days, but it's grown substantially. Yeah, I was then probably just after you. I was south of Quito Cunaval from February to May 1988, where we were attempting to take Quito Cunaval, which we weren't really successful in doing. I think lots of landmines stopped us getting too far. But I think from our side, the big thing was that we'd lost air superiority to the MiGs. The MiGs were by then far superior to our Mirages, and we got bombed sort of pretty regularly. Fortunately, I think the MiG, as much as our Mirages were scared of the MiGs, I think the MiGs were scared of potential anti-aircraft weapons. So they tended to fly very high and drop their bombs very randomly. So they weren't really on specified targets. It was just a sort of hit and miss affair. So I'm not aware of any. I saw some big craters that had been made by the bombs, but I'm not aware of anyone actually being hit by the bombs dropped by the MiGs. But we possibly just missed each other in that sort of area of Angola. Yeah, and in fact, you mentioned Mike Bale at some stage. Mike was on that tour to Smokeshell with me, so I've known Mike quite well for quite a long time. Yeah, and then, sorry, just in terms of your 3.5 year stay in Angola, were you able to go home on a regular basis to visit your family, or were you literally just stuck in Angola for the whole time?
Yes, first of all, I salute all those who were killed in action during this Operation Skeptic, during this Smokeshell operation. Well, respect to fallen warriors. Secondly, yeah, during my actually 3.5 years stay in Angola, we were allowed only once to go on vacation to the Soviet Union, to Moscow, only once, because the cost of flying to Moscow, to the Soviet Union and back to Angola, joining back, remembering that there were thousands of Soviet specialists working in Angola at the time, it was quite expensive for, adventure.
Yeah. And
So
did
only
you
once. And one more interesting thing. I told you that I arrived in Angola in August 1985. On the 4th of August 1985 was my first anniversary of my marriage. So I celebrated it alone in Angola, in Luanda.
Yeah. I was going to ask you the question as to whether you had a wife or children, um, and in those days technology wasn't what it is today. So you couldn't just pick up your cell phone and phone home. I mean, I suppose I would imagine that even the postal system was very slow. If you
Oh,
if you sent a letter to your wife, I'm assuming it took months to get there almost, and the same if she
so
sent a letter to you.
yes, in yes, in our case, it took some 2 weeks to receive or to send a letter to receive a letter. Even newspapers, we received newspapers 2 weeks with 2 weeks delay.
Okay, well, I anticipated it would probably be worse. So 2 weeks is not that bad. I think our postal system in South Africa at the moment, you'll be lucky to get post within 2 months. Um, our post office is now in
or
liquidation,
never.
or never, yeah, or never. Okay, so your wife basically had to sit at home and worry about you uh, with very little communication. You didn't have any children at that stage.
No, no, no,
Right.
no.
Okay,
We
because
will.
that must.
We've been married for just 1 year, and
Right.
no kids, of course, because I was going abroad. I was going to Angola.
Yeah.
With all this uncertainty, we decided not to have any children.
Okay, and have you had children since?
No, unfortunately, well, we divorced soon after my returning back,
Uh,
and sadly, well, but we maintained good relations nevertheless.
okay.
And but sadly, my first wife, passed away not so long ago. So, well, that's the situation.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but and did you remarry? Did you? Okay. All right, and
No,
you're still
I'm.
married.
We've yes. My second wife, Tatiana. We've been together for some 15. I don't remember how many years.
Don't let her hear
But
that. You'll be in trouble.
no, I will not tell you. I hope she does not hear, does not listen. So in any case, we are very happy now, and I have a 2 year, almost 3 year grand kid now, Peter, who is living in St. Petersburg, and he's going to visit us this summer. So
Okay.
life is going on.
That's great. I've got a granddaughter who will be 3 in August, and a grandson who's
Oh,
just a year. So they're still small,
oh,
but unfortunately they stay fairly close to us, so we see a lot of them. Then your time in Angola finished. Uh, did you then go back to Russia, or were you deployed elsewhere?
yes. In October 1988, I returned back to the Soviet Union. And then, for 1 year, I was looking for a proper job, for a proper post. And I found some temporary work doing here and there. And in 1992, I joined the United Nations, and as a military,
Advisor.
the military wing of the
Yeah.
military
Yeah.
inspector, so to say, yeah, the military observer. I went to Cambodia, where I stayed for another year and a half. And after that, as far as I did not find any good, any satisfying job, any satisfying position in the Soviet Union, in Russia already, because the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. So in 1994, I quitted the army, and but still I was in the rank of colonel. So now I'm colonel retired, and I'm on pension now. not in active military service since then.
Okay. Okay. Igor, can you just give me a second? I just want to put a light on because it's starting to get a bit dark here. Okay. So do you actually then get a military pension or
Yes, I get, but this
okay.
pension is well, is funny.
Okay. Okay, because I think that's what my next question was going to be is do you feel that and I know there was obviously the big change between Soviet Union and just becoming Russian. Um, but to me, from a South African army point of view, we were youngsters. We didn't really have a choice. We when we were 16, we got a number and got told when you finish school, this is where you're going to go. The choices were very limited. If we didn't go there, we could, of course, sign up for permanent force, and then we'd be able to choose our unit. So
Hmm.
potentially, if I was sent to an infantry battalion, I could say, hang on, I'm prepared to sign up for 5 years and go to the Navy. But but in terms of doing your 2 years, you were told that's where you go in and that's where you went. Um, and I mean,
Yeah.
we were only 18, 19 years old. Um, but but something that troubled me about the South African Army, and it goes back to the attack on Smoke Shell. I've got a very good friend who got shot through the stomach with a 14.5 anti-aircraft. And
Hmm.
43 years later, he's battled. He's still got a big hole in his back. He was very fortunate in that he married a really wonderful wife, and she was a nurse, and she's been able to look after him. But but when it comes to medical treatment, um, he was he was actually they thought he was dead at Smoke Shell, and then discovered that there
Hmm.
was still a bit of life. They managed to get him on a helicopter. Eventually, got him to one military hospital in Pretoria, where he spent 3 years. That's how long it took them to just get him to be sort of semi-fixed. And when he finished, he said, "Well, now, guys, what do have you got a job for me or something?" And they said, "No, we don't need you anymore. Goodbye, go home." And and even in recent times, if he's had 100 operations since then. So it's an ongoing medical issue. And there's very little support from the South African military. Um, they say that they will help, but he needs to get pre-approval. Now, that pre-approval process can take 3 to 4 to 5 months. Now, if he needs to be operated next week, he can't wait for
Hmm.
3 months for approval. So for all intents and
Hmm.
purposes, there's no support there. And I'm talking for conscripts. I'm not talking necessarily permanent force guys. Obviously, the permanent force guys served, some of them 20 years, and got pensions and medical aids and things. I'm talking more the 2 year guys. If something went wrong, there's been very little support. And I was just wondering from your side whether there's a better support system in place or
Well, at that time, in late 80s, the system of manning the armed forces, the Soviet armed forces, was approximately the same like in South Africa. So we had a conscription, the so-called obligatory service. So all persons, all male persons after graduating from the school after their matrix were to undergo military training as conscripts.
yeah,
So they were drafted the same. But in my case, I did not want to go as a conscript, so I joined a military establishment. So I did not go to serve, well, this obligatory service. But I studied for 5 years. For 5 years. So that was the system. Either you go to serve 2 years of, in your case, national service. In our case, it was called obligatory service. Yeah, or
okay,
you join the permanent force. In our case, is regular army. So
yeah,
I chose the permanent army. So After graduating from the institute, I became an officer. I was a lieutenant. I was commissioned lieutenant. So for me, there was no further choice either to go to continue my service or not. I must continue my service. So I chose Angola in my case. Others chose other countries. But at that time, there was another great war in Afghanistan. And the situation in Afghanistan differs from the situation in Angola, because in Angola, we were only advisors, technicians, and interpreters, no regular army. While in Afghanistan, there was a regular army, the 40th Army, operating there. And there were servicemen, there were conscripts who were drafted and sent to Afghanistan. And the same situation as with you or with your friend you just mentioned, those who receive, were injured or badly injured or killed, sometimes their families or they themselves came for medical treatment or for reimbursement for some privileges, and they were told, like us, they were told, we did not send you there. We did not know you. There is a war in Angola, so it's up to you to get to a medical establishment and to pay for it. We did not send you there. So the situation is approximately, roughly, is the
Roughly the
same.
same. Yeah. So
You
in
just
Angola,
with this situation, you just. Mhm.
yeah. So in Angola, would it have only been permanent force members? There wouldn't have been any conscripts from the Russian side of things or the Soviet
No,
Union.
there were just maybe some 10 or 20 conscripts who were serving as signalers, drivers,
Okay.
radio operators, mostly in Luanda, in this headquarters, in the military headquarters of Russian advisors, just
Okay.
serving there, not in the, not participating in combat or anywhere else.
Okay. So yeah. So we probably faced very similar situations, really.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
Of course
yeah.
the other big difference is you were fighting someone else's war. You weren't at home. You weren't looking after your own boundaries or your own borders. We were, we were looking after our borders, or certainly that was the story we were led to believe. So it was almost we were fighting for our own countries, whereas you guys had been, and I suppose it's the same whether it's Afghanistan or Cambodia or Vietnam or Korea or any of these places. Effectively, the cause that you're fighting for is to a large extent someone else's cause.
Yes, and Andrew, we were. I'm speaking about myself. I myself was um, highly motivated, I should say, at that moment, because yes, I was deployed thousands kilometers from Moscow in a strange, to me, to all Russians, in a strange continent, in a strange Angola, fighting for some swappers whom we didn't know or hadn't known before. But we understood their cause. We understood what they were fighting for. They were fighting for independence, and we Russians always help those who need our help.
Yeah.
That's why I was motivated. Yeah, I
Okay.
was. I went through all these hardships, living and sleeping in the bush, under the rain and in trenches. In this, I know what is this white sand is, because I travel through this white sand. I know
Now the
what this you called it a hack and stick
Hulk and stick. Yeah.
bush.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
thorn.
hack and stick. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's just tearing off your uniform. Yes, I went through it. I
Yeah.
know. I these mambas and the scorpions. I was just sleeping with them there, with this dangerously looking lizards and whatnot.
But I'm sure you'd love to come back.
Yes, That's actually that is my biggest dream to one day visit well this Africa, which became very familiar, became very well. It's now in my soul and it's my heart, and it's my dream to visit South Africa and Namibia and Angola as well.
Igor, if you ever get a chance, you just give a shout and we will make sure that you're accommodated. We'll find you a place to stay wherever around the country. I'm sure I can even organize in Namibia, in Windhoek, and potentially um, our 6-1. I'm a 6-1 veteran, um, and they organize a tour to Angola virtually every year. And I'm sure we could make a plan if you can just get here. That just brings me to another point. We as veterans in South Africa, we get together quite often. We have regular get-togethers where we can talk about our experiences. My feeling is other people don't really understand. The best time you can talk is when you're talking to guys that were there with you. Do you guys have regular get-togethers of Russian soldiers that were in Angola or in various parts of?
Yes, Andrew. First of all, thank you for your invitation. And if such an occasion occurs, I would certainly contact you or my friends, Mike or Roland or whoever
Yeah,
I remember who is still there in Joburg or in Pretoria or Cape Town. Anyway, thank you. And concerning your second question, yes, we have an organization of veterans here in Moscow. It's called the Russian Union of Angola War Veterans, and we regularly get together. We assemble to rub our shoulders, as you call it, and to celebrate some events and to mark some probably some sad events like, for example, the 4th of May this year will mark the anniversary of Kasinga attack. On the 16th of November each year, we get together to celebrate the arrival of the first batch of Russian advisors in Angola back in 1975. So such meetings, such assemblies of veterans, well, are regular as well.
oh, that's good to hear. So I think between South African military or veterans, Russian veterans, we have a very similar approach to life. Um, yeah, and then I don't know if there's anything more you'd like to talk about about your time in Angola.
Actually, we'd better meet together and discuss it once again, and because in direct conversations,
There's always more.
it's better to yes to remember more stories and well to share funny stories and sad stories.
Okay.
It's
Well,
better in
well,
direct contact.
yeah. Well, when you come out here, we will talk some more. And otherwise, if you don't
Yeah,
come, we'll have to come and visit you in Moscow. Um,
yeah, you're
I don't.
welcome. You just be sure you can ask Mike Bale. He will tell you.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. What?
we're always welcome.
Yeah. The current situation over there, and I don't want to get into it.
I stay away from this situation. I cannot judge it because I do not have all the details.
And that's
You know,
exactly what
as
I'm
you
saying from my
correctly,
side.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So,
think.
but
Yeah, I think obviously there's some.
Andrew, anyway, the
Yeah.
situation in Moscow is very quiet. Is no problem at all, no hardship was
Okay.
whatsoever. Me personally, I do not feel any hardship.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, and that's great to
Thank
hear.
you, thank you.
And hopefully the conflict gets resolved and everyone on both sides
Absolutely,
can
absolutely,
go back to living a normal life.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
our desire, the desire of ordinary people is for the war, for the fighting, for the killing to be stopped immediately.
I'm
And
sure.
all this, everything is to be solved at the negotiation table, not at the front.
I think people that have been through it before don't want it to happen again. People ask me about my national service, and I often say, if I'd been asked, if it had been voluntary, I don't think I would have done it. But having done it, I'm not sorry. And if our actions helped make it better for them, then we've probably achieved something.
Yes, our efforts, all our sufferings were not in vain. Were
No,
not in vain.
no,
No.
absolutely, yeah. Okay, Igor, if you've got nothing more, then I'll say thank you very much. And to the legacy viewers out there, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and until we meet again, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.